So moving on, we're going to start talking about outside stem and or screw and yoke control valves. This falls under the category of a gate valve. So this is a rising stem, outside screw and yoke, rising stem OS&Y gate valve, and this would be a non-rising stem gate valve. So if it's not already obvious, one of them, the stem rises, and the other one, the stem stays put as it changes state. So I'll get onto this one next, but let's just stick with the program here. So some of the pros about this one is it's indicating, and the stem is very well your indicator, right? So you know when this valve is open, you know at a glance when this valve is closed, right? So when she's all the way closed, that disc comes down, right? And I know just at a glance, I can look across the room and I'll be like, oh yeah, that OS&Y is closed right now, right? So I know if it's on a sprinkler system, it better be open unless they're using it for like a test header or something like that. So that's that. Another great pro about these is service. These are very serviceable valves. You can take everything apart. You can service everything. You can order parts. So long as someone doesn't somehow completely mash up the body and screw it up, like you can take this apart and you can work on it, right? You can change the packing gland graphite or whatever you have to do if it starts leaking a little bit too much, right? Tighten her down. They're great for service. Another good thing about them, if it's not already obvious from a wide open OS&Y, that is a full bore opening. So these have fantastic hydraulics. These are basically matched with ball valves for hydraulics. Water goes straight through and in. So whenever you have a fire pump, this is very typical for what you'll see on the suction side of a fire pump, just because water is allowed to go just right on through, doesn't cause any cavitation or anything like that. Pros for joint methods, as you can see, this one's screwed. They do come in flanged as well. I'm not sure if they actually come in grooved, although I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think I've ever installed a grooved OS&Y before, personally. I feel like if I were to see one, it would be on like a backflow or something like that. So I actually don't know about that one. Sorry about that. I should have done a little bit of research on that. But yeah, so there are multiple methods, though. It's pretty decent for joint methods. I put it in blue, supply and discharge ports. This one doesn't have one. This is just 1.25 inches. I ripped this one off of a jockey pump inlet or outlet or something like that. But once you start getting into the larger pumps, it's larger OS&Ys, like we're talking like 4-inch plus, maybe even 3-inch, maybe 2.5. Either way, I'm sure you could probably even order them, maybe even for this one, maybe get like a little 1/4-inch port in there or something. But it is not uncommon to see ports on OS&Ys. Which kind of puts us into that whole, for this one, you can install it in any orientation, left, right. It's the exact same. It's identical. It doesn't matter which side's supply, which side's discharge. However, once you start having ports involved, well, maybe you might want to actually start installing them so that your port is on the supply side of a clapper. So if this first OS&Y were the first valve coming into my building, like my actually, let's not say that. Let's say we've got a backflow preventer first, and then let's say this is my main feed shutoff valve. So right after my backflow, they decided to add one more here, and this is probably, say for example, the feed going to the fire pump. If there is a 1-inch port, or maybe like 1.25 inch port, whatever, if there's a port on the supply side, we can use that now to feed our jockey pump. Now, we would want to make sure that port's on the supply side. We wouldn't want it on the discharge side, because if I'm ever doing service to my fire pump and I close it, well, I've now killed that port, which is on the downstream side. I've killed my jockey pump. So if I want to work on my fire pump, I now basically need to shut off my jockey pump in tandem with it, just because of how it was installed. So when you have ports, gives you a little bit of options, just a little free opening, so you don't have to drill a MAC-T on your supply piping or have your shop put in a weldolet or something like that. So just keep in mind, sometimes they do have them, and when they do, they're great. You can use them for stuff. Methods of supervision, not too. So the most common one you're going to see is what's called an OS&Y SU switch, made by Potter. Just like any other switch, it's just a normally open, normally closed contact. That's all it is. It's just the switch changes state. What an OS&Y is there's a bracket that just sits along the housing here, And this one does not have one. More modern OS&Ys do, but along the stem, there's going to be a little notch. So if I were to, oh, does this one have one? No, it does not. Does it? No, I lied. Okay, so I will just quickly draw it out. So on the smooth part of this stem, let's get this out of the way. I don't have yellow. Let's pretend I can draw really well. On the smooth part of the stem, you will actually have a little notch, a little indent. On the more modern ones, it will kind of look like this. I'm going to emphasize it there. Now, they're supposed to be even. I'm sorry I didn't draw them perfect. But anyways, that OS&Y switch will have, the OS&Y SU-2 basically just has a little arm, a little pull lever, and it sits right there in that notch. So as this valve changes states, as I start to close it, that notch is going to go, or that stem is going to go down, and this notch will roll up onto this higher part, the bald part of the stem, and it will change the switch's state. So that's how the OS&Y SU-2 switches work. If you do not have one and you need to put one in, this is actually worth noting, you have to use what's called a rat tail file. It's basically about 1/4 of an inch in diameter, and before you start filing your stem, you obviously don't have too much meat, but you always want to file as high up as possible, because as my OS&Y stem closes, that notch is going to go down into my packing gland down here, and it's going to start to chew up that packing, that graphite that I have down inside here, inside the bonnet, right? So the higher up that you put it, the less likely it is going to start to grab that graphite and damage your valve. And over time, what's going to happen is, this is a very common thing, this is actually probably a con, that I should put this in there, is they are prone to start leaking on the packing gland right here. So you can give them a little bit of tighten on your packing gland nuts right here, and that might stop it. You're going to have guys that reef on them, and then they're going to break them. And then, even though I said you could service them, most companies are just going to say, well, you broke your valve, let's just change the whole valve, right? So as much of a pro as it is for service, personally, like I don't think many companies really do service them. Maybe some do, but the one I work for doesn't. We just change the whole valve. Not only that, it's just peace of mind, right? You get a whole brand new valve, and you know for sure right out of the manufacturer it's legit, right? So yeah, methods of supervision. The other one that you could put in is a PTS-C if you don't have enough room to get that in. And a PTS-C, they're kind of the most frowned upon style of supervision with Potter. But basically what it is it's basically just a switch that has a cord, a little plug-in cord. So you would have to make sure that switch is secured to something properly. Like I've seen them zip tied to like rods or whatever. Zip ties don't cut it. On that bracket, there's actually couple of holes. Make sure you get that screw anchored into concrete or something where you can't just easily take that off. And then the cord runs across. You want to make sure it's looped around the handle and it's tight. You plug it back in. The point is, so basically as you start to close the valve, that plug cord is wrapped around this handle, so that as you start to close it, it's just going to naturally want to pull out that plug. And that plug is also electronically supervised. So if someone were to cut that cord, it's going to create an open condition, and they will still get a signal. So someone knows if you're tampering with them. So, but they're not, like I said, they're not really the most typical switch that you'll see. It's usually an OS&Y SU-2 by Potter. I put under pro accidental tampering, and the only reason I say that is because as these valves get bigger, everything gets bigger. Like I pulled it. This is a 10-inch stem. For a 10-inch valve that came out, and like the wheel is literally like, it's like bigger than a steering wheel. So for someone to go in there and start turning it, once you start turning it as well, like, it really does take a few turns before you really kind of start to see that stem move. So the reason I kind of put into the pro category is it's not exactly the type of thing that you can brush past and accidentally bump it. So, and they're not quite as buttery either. I'm not saying all of them aren't. Some of them are really nice and smooth. But unlike a butterfly we just talked about, there's a little bit of resistance on there, a little bit of torsion, I guess you could say. So yeah, they're a little bit less prone to accidentally causing that tampering supervisory to go off. So some of the cons: they are heavy, they are bulky, and the stem can be a spear. So obviously this is just a little 1.25 inch one, but as they get bigger, they get big. So, and they're not they take up a lot of real estate, right? So unlike a butterfly, you can have a 4-inch butterfly that is, you know, no bigger than what's in my hand. Like I can easily carry it one-handed. Once you get a 4-inch OS&Y, that's a bit of a two-hander. You got to carry the body over here. It takes up a couple of feet of space. You know what I mean? Once you start getting into those 10-inch guys, those are, oh geez, I don't know how heavy they are. I think they're well over 200 pounds. Like if you're putting them up anywhere, you know, you basically need chain falls to get them in there. So stuff like that. It's a two-man job sometimes. Oh, there is a notch on this. How silly of me. There's a notch right here. Right there. There's that notch that I was talking about right in there. So that toggle goes in here. As that valve changes state, it actually goes this way. That's the disc side. So as that changes states, it just knocks on the switch pull moves up right here. Why didn't I see that? So silly of me. Anyways, that's that. Yeah, oh yeah, so this is what I mean. Like, that's the 10-inch stem. I think this thing weighs, like, it's got to be close to 20 pounds. So this is a nice, sweet piece of brass right here. But I just like it. It looks really cool. And this is what I mean by it's a stem spear. So when this is normally open, this thing is sticking out of the valve like, you know, 14 inches right here, right? My valve handle's typically right here where the threads stop, right around here. Maybe not 14, call it 12 inches. But it is not uncommon. I'm sure anyone who's been in the trade will tell you that they have accidentally walked into OS&Y stems and they've speared themselves, and it's not cool. So it's not uncommon. Guys will put tennis balls on the end just to, or you know, put a little bit of red tape on it, like a little bit of a caution tape or something, just so you know it's there. The last con I could kind of think of on the fly is they are expensive, right? The cost of a 4-inch OS&Y in comparison to a 4-inch butterfly is, I actually don't know what it is, to be honest. I've never personally purchased one, but I do know for a fact that they are much more expensive. So when it comes down to quoting jobs, unless there's a spec in there that says, you know, all valves shall be OS&Y style, you know, every company, because they're all competing and they're all bidding, they're always going to go with the cheapest method. And typically on fire pumps is where, you know, you're going to for sure see one, but after that, everyone's going to say, all right, let's go get those butterflies, right? They're the cheapest ones, quick to install, right? That's the other thing, right? So I guess I could go into a con is time of installation. They're so much bulkier. They take a little bit longer to install than just like a grooved 4-inch butterfly, right? So a few things like that. These are, like I said, these are just kind of the obvious things. I wanted to just pick out the biggest things that that really stand out. But we as installers, I kind of like to, I don't like, but I try to avoid costs. As fitters, as a company, if you're going to own a company, absolutely, that's something you want to know. But as a fitter, you should always try to think of what is best for the system, what is best for the customer, what is best for your pump, you know, what is going to protect. We care about doing the right thing. Money is, you should always try to tackle jobs as if money is not an option. That's how you should think, and you're going to start to keep that mindset, right? Just like hydraulics, like people don't really care about hydraulics, but you as a fitter, you need to be conscientious of that, right? Like you don't want to see spider webs of pipe going all left and right. This looks greasy, right? You know, someone's installing something and someone was being lazy when their re-and-ring drops or whatever. So, you know, take some pride in your work, right? We all want to do the right thing. So that more or less covers it for OS&Ys. And I think we're going to start jumping into IS&Ys, or non-rising stems.